All right, hi everybody. Welcome to the EcoMindset Podcast. I'm joined today by author and activist Yves Engler. We're going to talk about some of the big issues facing Canada, the United States, and the world in 2025. I want to start by asking you what you think about this recently brokered ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. Do you think that this has the potential to be a lasting ceasefire, and what are your views on it?
Well, obviously, it's a good thing for those who've been slaughtered over the past 16 months to have a bit of reprieve. Also, obviously, there's lots of issues with lack of food and stuff like that. That's, many more trucks are getting in with food for Palestinians in Gaza. So I think it's a good thing. Israel hasn't succeeded very clearly in its two kind of maximalist objectives, which was to ethnically cleanse Gaza and to destroy Hamas. That's obviously incredible numbers of people have been killed, and one report said 92% of all homes are damaged or destroyed in Gaza, and 70% of all buildings. The devastation is, kind of hard to wrap one's head around. I think it's a good thing. Obviously, the ceasefire. I think it's kind of surprisingly, it's in large part due to. I think that the Palestinian resistance ability to keep fighting is important, and then obviously. Surprisingly, Donald Trump's pressure, which is interesting because Biden didn't really bring that pressure, and Trump basically forced Netanyahu to agree. Now, will it last? I think it will last for the first 6 weeks, phase one. After that, I think it's going to be very difficult for it to last. Clearly, Netanyahu is going to try everything he can to get out of it. He didn't want to agree to this. It's opposed by the two far right ministers in his government and lots of the far right in Israel. And quite frankly, lots of Zionists in Canada. It's remarkable to see people who say they care about the quote unquote hostages released, who kind of quickly online are sort of complaining about. Essentially complaining that they want to see more Palestinians being killed. But will it continue? I don't know. I think the question becomes whether Trump's willing to keep putting pressure on Netanyahu.
When Trump was speaking about the conflict before becoming president, he was saying that all hell would break loose if the hostages were not returned by the time he takes office. When I heard that, I thought it was more of a threat towards the Palestinians, that he would unleash more brutality and that kind of thing. You're saying that there was pressure on Israel as well to come to an agreement?
Oh, very, very clearly. That's now, the Wall Street Journal had that on the front page, and Haaretz and all kinds of his Middle East envoy Witkoff basically pushed it down Netanyahu's throat. That's those threats were actually threats. While they were framed as threats against Hamas or against Palestinians in Gaza, they were actually threats against Netanyahu. From the Palestinian perspective, all hell had already broken loose. What more can you do to us in Gaza? Trump's obviously an odd character. He's an extremely Zionist, his first term, and if you look at his appointees in different positions, they're wild Christian Zionists, as the U.S. ambassador Huckabee.
How does Elon Musk, doing the Nazi salute, fit with Trump's Zionism?
Well, I think it fits really well. As Musk posted yesterday, how can I be a Zionist and a Nazi? And I think that you can make a good case that Zionists or Israel supporters today are akin to the Nazis. I think that. If you go back to the history of fascism, there was lots of fascists that supported Mussolini, lots of Jewish people who supported Mussolini. In fact, there were even small numbers of Jewish people who supported Hitler early on. As incredible as that may sound. But I think that the reality is that Trump is about himself. Trump wanted this off the table while his inauguration, right? I think he wanted to take the credit and wanted to have it sort of for his inauguration, whether he continues putting that pressure. I think the Witkoff, his representative, is a big real estate tycoon, and I think he has some interests, some capitalist interests with the Middle East Gulf countries. And so Trump wants to do this normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel, which they see, I think, in part through the lens of Trump sees through the lens, and Witkoff sees through the lens of sort of real estate development and these kind of things. Trump's comment yesterday about Gaza being a great place to sort of put homes and close to the beach and stuff like that. So there's this. And Jared Kushner had been involved in those kind of talks and even sort of like project planning on Gaza. But I think back to the more kind of important question from certainly from Canadian perspective, if you look at Justin Trudeau's comments when the ceasefire was announced and then the first release of captives, it takes a totally Israeli perspective on it, right? The captives, the only people released were Israelis. There's 3 Israelis. Well, the Palestinians that were released, like Khalida Jarrar, I knew her 2 daughters who went to University of Montreal in Canada, and she was a member of the legislature, Palestinian legislature, Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, a leftist, sort of Marxist kind of leaning political party. And this is just ignored, right? We have 10,000 Palestinian hostages, and many of them are as much hostages as the Israelis, in that they were.
But they call them prisoners.
They call them prisoners. They're just literally captured, and we even just saw yesterday Israel captured 60 more hostages after they released 90. They captured 60 more in the West Bank, so they have more chips to give up in exchange. So you see Trudeau, basically Palestinians aren't human beings, right? The reprieve that's happened for those in Gaza, that's just ignored, and it's like, oh, well, finally these Israelis can come home, and the Israeli nation has, been a hard 16 months, and that's kind of the framing of Canadian politics. It's remarkable to see that the level of racism on that. Now, and then, other part of the ceasefire question I think is important for Canadians is what are we going to do to ensure that Netanyahu doesn't break the ceasefire? We know they want to break the ceasefire. They've already done things that contravene what they've agreed to, as they've done in a very aggressive way in Lebanon. The ceasefire in Lebanon, Washington Post reported yesterday that Israel's blown up 800 buildings in Lebanon during the time of the ceasefire. So we know they'll do that. They'll try to do that in Gaza. And what's Canada willing to do to ensure a ceasefire, stays, and the full, and that of course means putting pressure on Israel. And Netanyahu and Trudeau has done everything everything he can to not do that, despite large amounts of unprecedented, really. Grassroots pressure for Canada to lessen its arms sales, to lessen its charity support, to its free trade agreement, its intelligence support, its all kinds of different forms of Canadian support to Israel. So that's I think the imperative thing. If we want a ceasefire, we need the governments of Canada, obviously the U.S. most importantly, but also Britain, France, others, to ramp up the pressure to ensure that Netanyahu doesn't do everything he can to break what he's agreed to.
And that this whole thing isn't just a show for the first few days in office of Trump, so that he can fulfill his promise of putting an end to all the international crises and that sort of thing that he mentioned during the campaign trail, I guess. Eh?
Exactly. So I think maybe one of the things in the background is that Trump talked a lot about that with regards to Ukraine. I think we might get to that later, but that was said, even before I get into office, well, I'll end the war in Ukraine, and that showed that was not a viable situation. So I think that getting some success on a ceasefire in Gaza, fulfilled a little bit of his sort of bombastic, absurd rhetoric.
Yeah. And also with respect to Trump in Canada, like he's made these statements about, Canada becoming the 51st state. He's, calling Justin Trudeau the governor of the state of Canada. He's, talking about using economic force to annex us. And also, potentially military force for Greenland and the Panama Canal. A lot of people, when they heard about this for the first time, thought it was a joke or something like that. Personally, I didn't really take it as a joke because Canada is integrated so closely with the United States on so many different issues over the past 20, 30 years, whether it's defense or foreign policy or economic integration. The ties between Canada and the United States are so close, right? We say that it's a relationship unlike any other. We have this huge unguarded border. So it seems to me that it could be an actual possibility. I mean, here Canada is sitting with all of these resources, all of this fresh water, all of this territory directly adjacent to the United States, with virtually no military to defend ourselves and what it seems like no allies either that are going to come and save us from a potential invasion from another NATO country, United States. What's your take on all of this? How concerned should people be, and is this realistic that within the next few years of the Trump presidency that they could march soldiers up over the northern border and essentially capture the country? And I think that if that happened, we'd have to come out with our hands up. I don't think that we'd have any real means to resist something like that. Do you think that that's something that Trump could order, or that it's?
Well, I think that the tariff thing is realistic, and I think it's very likely that there will be tariffs that are imposed. I think at this point, Trump would almost be difficult not to impose some form of tariff, considering how much he's talked about it, and he repeated it again, I guess, yesterday or 2 days ago.
I heard in 2019 he had threatened Mexico with 25% tariffs, but then ended up backing off.
Okay.
And it's interesting also that he had originally committed to doing it in the first day of the presidency, and now it's a few days off. And he's only says he thinks they're going to be applied. So it's almost like he's backed up a bit already, no?
Yeah, I think he has backed up a bit already, but I don't know all the details with regards to Mexico. But my impression here is that the number of times that he's made this threat and repeated this threat is such that he's probably in a position where he impose some. Now, whether it's on a handful of goods, whether it's on a handful of sectors, versus the across the board kind of rhetoric that we've been hearing, I don't think that Donald Trump's going to send troops to march to take over Canada. I think that would be a incredibly dumb thing to do, leaving aside the moral question and whatever. I think it would just be obviously dumb. The National Post today had a story saying that basically 2 to 1 Americans aren't interested in having Canada part of the U.S. They did a poll. I don't know how.
Because it would change the balance of power in the United States between Democrat and Republican, I guess. Like if.
Yeah, my guess is it's a bit more visceral than that. That just somebody asks you, like, do you want this country that's not currently part of your country to be part of your country? And people just sort of say, no, I don't really want that. And they haven't really thought through like what Canada being part of the U.S. would mean. Whether once they think it through more, they will be more inclined, maybe.
What I really worry about is, let's say, like in these trade talks, if Canada would stop energy exports to the United States, or stop sending electricity, or try to block our resources from getting there, that seems like something that could trigger like a more harsh response from them. Yeah,
of course. Yeah, it could. But you have to assume, or I would assume, some degree of rationality among. I mean, first thing, the U.S. had plans to invade and occupy Canada for a long time, until World War II. Basically, they had formal military planning that was adopted to invade Canada and to occupy Canada for a long period of time.
Yeah.
And I've got the exact wording in front of me, but to basically punish that it would be, it was supposed to be part of a war with Britain. That was how it was framed. And Canada, conversely, had plans to resist a U.S. occupation or U.S. invasion. And there's all kinds of border disputes over the years that obviously there's the War of 1812, but there's many different, in Yukon in the late 1800s and other Oregon agreement. So there's a whole history of disputes, land questions between Canada and the U.S. I would tend more towards Jean Chrétien's comment. So in his memoir, Jean Chrétien says he told Bill Clinton that if we seem to have a little bit of independence, I'm paraphrasing here, but if you seem to have a little bit of independence, don't just seem like a 51st state, we can do things for you that even the CIA can't do. And that's like he says, even the CIA can't do that.
Because we have a voice at the United Nations and on the world stage.
Yeah, we can send troops to Haiti. And then, one of the things he did was that he gets caught on a hot mic at the NATO summit in '96. Chrétien saying Clinton wants to go send more troops into Haiti. The Congress won't let him. He turns to me, he says, can you send some troops down? And I say, okay, but I expect something later down the road. So, that would be an example where Canada did, Clinton had some domestic political issues that made it difficult to engage in Haiti how he wanted. And so we'll ask Canada to do that policing of Haitians work. And there's many, like the more recently, talk about Chrystia Freeland. Chrystia Freeland, one of the things she did when she became foreign minister, she led the charge on Venezuela, right? The Lima group, which was really the Ottawa group, which was really actually the Washington group, but they preferred it to sound Lima, capital of Peru, rather than Ottawa, a North American country. And so she led that coalition of Latin American governments to join this bid to overthrow Venezuela's government. And that was, I think, very clearly, we're going to negotiate on the new NAFTA with Trump, and we're going to push for, better agreement on that. But we'll do, a bunch of foreign policy, sort of U.S. imperialism stuff that you want us to do.
Because what business would Canada have trying to change the government in Venezuela anyway?
Yeah. Well, it certainly shouldn't have any business. There's a history there of doing that type of stuff. But so I think that I don't think it would be very dumb if from the U.S. perspective to bring Canada in would have sense, like from a U.S. power would grow, and there's all kinds of water, there's all kinds
the
of
Arctic,
all kinds of resources that it would have beneficial. To do it by force, I think it would be that would have all kinds of reverberations that I don't think would be sensible from the standpoint of U.S. power in Europe, for instance. I think that it would be a pretty negative reaction among many countries in Europe. I think it would be very damaging for NATO. There would be all kinds of ramifications political that would, it's not just like, okay, you send the troops in and okay, we conquered Canada.
But at the same time, where's the reaction from these European countries to these threats that are being made? They just don't take it seriously for the moment.
Mostly, I think they think Donald Trump is just Donald Trump talking, which I think to a large extent is part of what he's doing. I think is a negotiation tactic as much as it is. I think Donald Trump probably, if he had a choice for his own personal legacy, to have said, hey, I incorporated Canada or annexed Canada into the U.S., I think he would say, let's do it. That's good, right? For his personal whatever. But there's a big step between that and then, actually sending troops across the border and like with the American military. I mean, I've made this joke many times, but that if the U.S. invaded Canada, the Canadian troops would participate in the U.S. invasion of Canada. Right? The Canadian military is so integrated into the U.S. military that there is no war that the U.S. wages that Canadian military is not supporting. Right. Be that through the different NORAD structures and intelligence and that of the Middle East, of all over the world. Be that all the Canadian troops that are integrated in U.S. units, right, including right up to the top. We have the former chief of the defense staff led 35,000 U.S. troops or foreign international troops during Iraq, right? He oversaw it because he was part of this American military training integrated U.S. unit, and they were sent to Iraq, and so he was in charge of 35,000 foreign troops in a war that we technically were not. We was not supposed to be part of that war, but we had top generals.
Was that like maybe one of our only times we supposedly stood up to the United States by Chrétien saying we're not going to participate in Iraq?
Yes, it's one of the only times in the history of Canadian foreign policy where there's a major difference. Like, and I think there's Canada participated in all kinds of ways, and all these
But there was that one day when I said we wouldn't.
No, but what we didn't do. No, this is an important. There's a bit of a debate in some left circles on this. Is that we didn't give Trump what he wanted above all else, which was official political endorsement of the coalition of the willing, and we didn't.
You mean Bush, right?
Sorry, Bush. Yeah, George W. Bush. The coalition of the willing, because of mass protest, principally here in Montreal and Quebec, because Chrétien was concerned about how the overwhelming opposition of the Quebec public to this war would basically benefit the Parti Québécois in the upcoming election, and it would sort of reinvigorate kind of sovereigntist thinking movement. But we were in charge of, the Canadian Navy was in charge of naval mission to block Iraqi naval vessels, and they had legal opinion at Department of National Defense that Canada was at war with Iraq. That was their own Canadian military's legal opinion because of our role in the blockade. So we did participate in that in many different ways. But yeah, so that gets back, so would it be a smart move for the U.S. to try to annex Canada through force? I think that would probably not be a smart move. But if they did try to do that, the Canadian military would probably participate in the invasion of Canada. They're not, and you see that the real fundamental contradiction in Trump's speech about annexing Canada through economic force. He talked about that speech and talked about that, and simultaneously said we basically Canada needs to spend a whole bunch more money on the military. Well, if you're annexing, talk about annexing a country, and then you're calling on them to increase their military spending, that's completely contradictory.
That's true.
But our military is not structured to defend Canada. Our military is structured to support the U.S. empire.
Right.
Two different ways. Well, many different ways, but two fundamental ways: by assisting the U.S. military, and because most of the arms companies that in Canada are branch plants of the U.S. military-industrial complex, as you know, as you've done on General Dynamics Canada, Lockheed Martin Canada, Boeing Canada, et cetera, et cetera. So increasing the Canadian military spending is good for the U.S. empire and U.S. arms companies. So the integration, getting to that question, the military is the most stark example of the integration, where the Canadian military is really just an extension of the U.S. military. And there's all kinds of, I quote in my book on the history of Canadian military, there's all kinds of examples where both Canadian and American military officials say there's no other country in the world, even the British military, that has that level of ties to the U.S. and it's just sort of, it goes down at the level of like literally how Canadians speak English, right? They don't even, Canadians part of the U.S. military, and the other people don't even know they're Canadian, right? Like, because they just, it becomes so easy to just, it's the cultural, the accent going on and on.
So basically you sign up for the Canadian military, it's like signing up for the American military.
I would say so. I would say that's how it should be perceived. And Donald Trump clearly perceives it that way when he's saying we need to put, Canada needs to boost its military and put more military.
Put up to 5%?
Well, that's the new plan through NATO, is that now it's 5% of GDP. We're pushing, begin at the 2%, and we force you to increase to 2%, and then, now that, as that's become mostly agreed to by the different NATO countries, now we're sort of talking about moving it up to the 5%, and maybe he'll the U.S. will be nice and say, oh, okay, just 3.5% of GDP. But for everybody, for all of us, and anybody who cares about the world and cares about Canadians for that matter, this is money that could go to the social housing. This is money that could go to building light rail in a context of climate crisis. This is money that could go to finishing these boiling water advisories on reserves.
Plus all the labor, right? Like all those people who will be employed, practicing military games rather than working on all of these infrastructure projects and all the different things we need to do in the country, right?
Yeah, it's a huge drain of talent and ingenuity and all this towards killing and destruction rather than making the world a better place. One of the things that should done, I propose this in my military book, is that people in the military, I think we should defund the military gradually and transition those people who are currently in the military to more socially useful work. But one of the steps in that is all these military bases that have all these ordnance, that's just destroying the environment, basically unlivable. Those people should be put to work to reclaiming that land. And that land, if you know the history of the Canadian military, has generally often been directly stolen from reserves, but obviously at a broad level, all stolen from Indigenous First Nations, but often in very brutal recent years, even recent decades, stolen from Indigenous communities. And so then the force should be used to make that, reclaim that land for being not destroyed ecologically, and then hand it over to First Nations. But Donald Trump wants us to go in a different way, which is to put more money into the military and to boost. And I should say, to be fair to Donald Trump here, it's not just Donald Trump. Joe Biden, Bill Clinton, it's across the board. The U.S., one of the constant demands of the U.S. officials is to increase military spending again.
And that's going back a long time.
Going back decades.
But we've always sort of ignored it to a certain degree, right? I mean,
to varying degrees. I mean, I think the logic from the Canadian perspective, or a strong logic from most Canadians' perspective, is we should be basically spending nothing on the military, because what does it give us? Right. If it's not to defend from the only country that could invade us, which is the U.S., it's not structured to do that. So what's the point?
It's like every now and then they come and save us from a flood or something.
Yeah, but you could build
for that instead.
That's totally doable. There's 20 countries in the world that don't have militaries. Most of them are small island countries, but a few fairly significant countries like Costa Rica and Panama, Iceland, that don't have and even without a military, we'd still have the RCMP and all kinds of armed forces. Still, it's not saying that there wouldn't be any armed forces, and that's a whole other question. Maybe we want to lessen that question as well. But so I think that if thought through, if you were to present the full case to most Canadians, I think you'd find that pretty quickly, half the country would sort of say, yeah, why do we spend any money on the military?
Right.
Now, of course.
But now the public support is building, right, for military spending?
Well, that's an interesting question. It's the polling on that has said that yes, there is a growing sense that people have been so scared by China's about to take over, and Russia has already taken over, and so there's an agreement, there's growing support for increasing military spending. But if you ask the question about priorities,
right.
Polls have shown it's always at the bottom.
Yeah.
It's basically always
That's
at the
why
bottom.
I found it so shocking that during that NATO summit that we had in Montreal in November, like Bill Blair, a federal minister, was saying, straight up that, well, we'll have to increase military spending, we'll have to cut in other places, in order to make this spending happen. You would think that that's a pretty dangerous statement for a politician to make there, that they're going to cut social programs to invest in the military, especially for a liberal government to be going that path. I mean, it seems like they could lose a lot of support over something like that.
They could, and that's why they've been sort of hedging on moving as far as I mean, if you read the papers, it's unanimity. there's rare little bit in the Toronto Star, maybe a rare little bit in Le Devoir, but it's basic unanimity that we just need to massively increase military spending. That is the overwhelming line.
It's like a media consensus.
It's a media consensus.
And commentators.
But it's very clearly not. They have to put out so much propaganda in favor of this because the public is so ambivalent towards it. And interestingly, if you look at Poilievre, actually he has not committed to the 2% GDP spending. And just a couple of days ago, Jack Granatstein, who is the most important militarist propagandist in Canada over the past half century, who's definitely a conservative, he has his column basically attacking Poilievre, like, you have to start talking in favor of the military, and how have you not taken this up? Because I think Poilievre knows that there is there's the military. If you poll people have generally positive opinion of the military as an institution. But then if you ask them...
Well, they make us worship it in school and stuff like that, right? And
But if you ask them, again, back to this question, they ask them their priorities, and it's consistently the economy, education, healthcare, environment, they all come above, in terms of their priorities, either in terms of just a general priority, what concerns them, or where social spending should go. Consistently, the military is right at the bottom of the main issues question. So yeah, and then to the broader questions of Canada's integration with the U.S., one of the things you kind of raised, like what we've seen with the first free trade agreements and then the NAFTA and now the upgraded NAFTA is that this is 25, 30 years of total economic integration to the U.S. and the people who opposed these agreements for sort of nationalistic reasons in the late 80s, I think have largely been shown to be right, and it's a degree of the Canadian capitalist class has just become totally tied in with the U.S. capital class. Not that they weren't already before the late 80s, but it's just taken to a new level, and the sort of nationalists. One of the things I find interesting in some of this stuff is you see some people like some of the nationalist people like a Maud Barlow, who was led the fight against the first free trade agreement, former head of the Council of Canadians. She has this sort of nationalist opposition, or certainly on the water question. She would obviously be no U.S. taking over Canadian water kind of, but she's totally bought into the U.S. empire's foreign policy outlook. So she's a staunch proponent of the NATO proxy war. She's very anti-China. She's on board with the demonization of Iran and stuff like that. So it's like Trump making these threats. She doesn't really want. She mostly is complaining about how Trump's not looking like he's going to operate the U.S. empire in the most effective way. That's her criticism. He might pull out of NATO. Well, wouldn't that be a good thing?
Reminds me of Elizabeth May.
There is some of that kind of dynamic. Yeah. And so what you've seen over the past 2 months or whatever of Trump's threats is that sort of this sort of nationalist, Canadian nationalist, anti-U.S. stuff that I think theoretically could be a big force in pushing back against this. They're kind of caught because they've gotten so into the U.S. empire over the past few decades that they, a real challenge to Trump, in my opinion, is not just saying, okay, we want to sort of negotiate a bit better agreement on this or that tariff or whatever. It's to say, we're not participating in the U.S. empire. We're going in a different direction. We're not just going to follow you on Venezuela. We're not just going to follow you on Haiti. We're not just going to follow you on Ukraine. We're not just going to follow you on China. I mean, the China one's.
Well, do you think that if anything, the Trump presidency gives that opportunity to Canada to push back on certain things?
Yeah, there's a big opportunity certainly for the NDP. I I think the popular opinion is there right now, let alone if they actually sort of
But the NDP itself hasn't really pushed back that much on the U.S. empire and the proxy war. And
well, it's not that they haven't pushed back; it's that they have supported.
Yeah.
They have supported on very aggressively on Ukraine. That's really clear. But they've even at the level of like Haiti, we asked the NDP's position about the core group, which is the foreign ambassadors that have basically been ruling Haiti for 20 years. Totally racist thing on its surface. It's just literally like the Canada, U.S., France, European Union, Brazil ambassadors, all like white guys who basically in a room, or white people, women sometimes, in a room who've been heavily determining Haitian affairs for 20 years. Just on like an optics level, it should be opposed, but in a practical level, it really should be opposed. And the NDP like endorses that, right? So the NDP supports, even on Venezuela, they went along. Forgetting her name, the former foreign affairs critic, she totally went along with the early coup efforts in Venezuela. They backed away a bit later. So yes, exactly. So and the NDP's gone along with the foreign interference. I mean, this is comedy. This is so here the media still try. After Donald Trump says, I'm going to annex Canada by economic force, the next day the Globe and Mail has an editorial about the dangers of foreign interference. And who is the foreign interference they're talking about? It's not the U.S., it's China.
Yeah.
I mean, like this is like...
If anything, we need to strengthen ties with China now, given the United States situation.
That's the bargaining chip. The bargaining chip is to say, and that's why the Americans, Trump in the upgraded NAFTA, included a clause to say you can't sign a trade agreement with China. Because it was...
Oh, really?
Yeah, they boxed Canada in to...
But we already have a trade agreement with China, do we not?
No. There was an investment agreement that was being negotiated. I don't know if it was ever fully confirmed. To check that. But early on, Trudeau was interested. That's part of why Trump put it in. It was interested in signing or negotiating a trade agreement with China. So, and actually, I was just reading in the Wall Street Journal. Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, was leading the premiers in the negotiation with the U.S. or on this tariffs questions. He has a column in the Wall Street Journal saying that basically the Canada-U.S. alliance is the greatest alliance to challenge China. Okay, same thing. Chrystia Freeland in the Washington Post Sunday or yesterday, or a couple days ago, has a column about the kind of Canada-U.S. relationship. Big part of it is sort of like this anti-China thing.
Yeah. So I saw Melanie Joly saying the same thing.
So here we are in a negotiation with the U.S. over this. There's only one other country, realistically, economically. If you're talking just economics, that's not this. I'm arguing on their terrain. I have a whole different ideological and what we should do for the world and all this kind of stuff terrain. But on their terrain, there's only one other economy that can be somewhat of a replacement to the U.S. market, and it's of course China. But all the Canadian politicians they're bashing China as part of their supposed pushback to Trump, and they're basically like our negotiating. Central negotiating chip we have is saying, well, okay, if you're going to do that, we're going to start doing more trade with China. But they're like basically they're so boxed into the U.S. empire narrative that even when any sensible person knows, any business person knows, and it's very clear in the business pages, that if we're not trading with China or the U.S., then but the Canadian government and the Canadian headspace is so pro-U.S. empire that they, even while negotiating with Trump, they're bashing the main chip we have. So, I think it's and this is in part. There's many factors in this. This is not new. This is not just tied to the first free trade agreement of '89 and then after that. Canada has been totally tied into the main empires for the past 2 centuries, right? This is from the British Empire to the American Empire, and the Canadian elite see the world and profit from the world in a very similar way. So there's a very long and broad, deep political culture that this is coming forward from. But on top of that is some specific deals made 30 some odd years ago. It's 35 years ago now, and at that time, a whole segment of even the majority of opinion in Canada, that the left nationalist world of like the Council of Canadians and the Maud Barlows and all this kind of stuff were pushing. They're right, but the ability to kind of weave back on this is very difficult. Again, especially when you've adopted so much of the empire's outlook that you're basically undercutting your main economic alternative. In the case of China, it's very clearly China, and also the bashing of Mexico. There's been months of this now, where and that's in there in the Doug Ford's column in the Wall Street Journal that I just mentioned. He bashes, rather than like trying to work with Mexico as part of. He's basically saying that Mexico is too amenable to China, and so we the Canada, that's part of what makes the Canada-U.S. thing, is because we're not amenable to China. And
because you think that like Canada and Mexico facing the same threat, right, by Trump, that these two countries would get together and have some sort of a common front.
Oh yeah, no. Take it one step further. Obviously, common front in the NAFTA negotiation, but why not common front with China? I mean, if you're going to actually try to respond to American pressure and the audacious American, just the threats of the tariffs are audacious, let alone the annexation. Then you say like, oh no, if you're gonna be like that, well, we're not just gonna die down in front of you or succumb in front of you. But no, part of that is racism, right? Is white supremacy, and I think especially we see with some of the stuff with Mexico. People joked about that with Doug Ford, who's like, brother was like crack smoking, he's got a whole like drug run and whatever, and he's like mocking Mexico as being like cartels.
So he used to be the cartel himself.
Right? So it's like reflects this sort of,
because he used to sell hash, right?
I think the whole family was tied into a whole. I mean, I don't know all the details about the Ford family, but I think it's pretty clear that they don't. If you're going to get into that terrain of like looking down on, I don't know, drug world or whatever, I don't think they're well situated to do that. So I think that it is pretty remarkable to see the lack of response to the Trump threats. I think part of it is sensible in that I think Trump is he speaks lots of stuff about lots of different things. But I think from a progressive position or standpoint, we should be taking this moment to, like Canada backing away from ties to the U.S. empire is good for the world. And Trump, as the face of the U.S. empire, I think offers some openings to really make it easier to make these arguments, right? We don't want to be part of the, we're not going to ally ourselves with the ugly American, to take a terminology of 40, 50 years that fits pretty well with Trump as the ugly American. And so I think that's kind of some of the stuff that we should. There's an opportunity to push some of those kind of positions, which are long-standing positions that I would have had for many years, and many others on the left have had for many years. But the dynamics of today offer some opening, and we saw a little bit of that, like Nikki Ashton, the NDP left NDP MP. She. The Canadian Foreign Policy Institute and Justice Advocates, we did this public letter to Jagmeet Singh and Heather McPherson, the foreign critic of the NDP, saying, basically making this argument to back up, don't just follow U.S. policy now that Trump and this kind of stuff like that. And Nikki Ashton seems to, on X just yesterday, she seems to have sort of taken up the kind of position where it kind of echoed that kind of thing. So I think within the NDP, and I would assume like within, probably Elizabeth May and Green Party kind of worlds, and even some element of the Liberal Party, they're seeing some of this kind of dynamic and saying, seeing some degree of, okay, well, should we back away a bit from the U.S. empire and this kind of stuff? Where it all goes, I don't know. But
I want to ask you about the Liberal leadership race. Now we've got Chrystia Freeland, who made some power moves there by pressuring Trudeau to leave, and now she's running. And she's been a very aggressive voice on the world stage in terms of escalation with Russia, particularly. There's the whole situation with her grandfather and everything, who was a Ukrainian Nazi supporter in World War II, and her failure to disown him and to, chart a different course for her politics, I guess. And then there's this Mark Carney, who's the former governor of the Bank of Canada, but that we really don't know very much about on other political issues other than monetary policy. Has he even commented on the situation in Gaza, the war with Ukraine? Do you know where he stands on foreign policy?
I don't really know where he stands. I bumped into him when Emmanuel Macron and Trudeau had an event, and then Macron was going to meet with Quebec Premier Legault. I bumped into Carney by there, and I asked him his position on the genocide in Gaza. And his response was to just refused to answer and get on his phone and act like he was really busy, and I kind of followed him, and it's kind of a funny little exchange. So he didn't want to take a position on that.
But is that already better than outright support for Israel?
Oh, I think that we need a campaign to defeat Chrystia Freeland for her position on her role in the Holocaust in Gaza, and that role is not when she's was foreign minister for 3 years, she was and even as trade minister before that, she was very pro-Israel. She's been at her launch on Sunday. She had Anthony House's father right next to her, right at the front, and that's clearly a message that I'm the most pro-Israel candidate here, and that. So I think definitely Chrystia Freeland should be opposed by anybody who's at all progressive. That doesn't at all say that Mark Carney, who would effectively be the main beneficiary, because it's effectively a Freeland versus Carney race. That's not to say that I would expect that Carney is not basically just as bad or close to as bad on all the foreign policy issues. Obviously, this is somebody who was, he's a serious capitalist, and so he's, I don't think when it comes to social spending, my guess is that he would probably be a bit worse than Trudeau when it comes to sort of like the support for social entitlements and social programs. I don't know if he'd be worse than Freeland or not on that issue.
Would it be better maybe at taxation? Because it seems that one of the big problems with the Liberal government is that they spend certain amounts of money, right? But they never really wanted to increase the tax rates, and so instead they just put it into deficit for 10 years straight and come out at the end saying oh well, we're completely indebted, we have to do austerity and stuff like that. If they would have taxed the money that they spent, we wouldn't be in this situation.
Well, I think a big chunk of the spending to be the
COVID
stuff, which I think was smart,
right.
Economic. I don't know that much about Carney, but considering his banking, Brookfield Asset Management, which is this $900 billion investment firm, which he until I guess a few days ago was the chair of, it's. These people are not supportive of capital gains taxes.
Right.
to be really, right. This is the people who will lose, who will pay more because of capital gains increases, right? So I don't think that Carney is going to be supportive of increasing tax rates on the wealthiest.
Is he rich himself? Do you know?
I don't know that. I looked a little bit. I think he is. He's certainly rich today. He's been.
Is he in the billions or?
No. I don't think he's. I don't think because I looked a little bit about his background. I don't think he comes from a particular wealth, big wealth. I don't know that much about it, but his positions with the Bank of Canada and then the Bank of England, I don't think that would have. They get paid well, but we're not talking about well in a capitalist sense.
Right.
More recently with Brookfield, I'm sure he's
more.
Making millions of dollars a year for Bill, and plus probably has stock portfolio and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know his actual amount, but it would probably be the highest. It'd be higher than Chrystia Freeland. I don't think Chrystia Freeland is I'm sure she's doing well, but she's not like she's certainly not a 100 million person. She's probably a few $1 million, or my guess is Carney's at the sort of tens of millions kind of range. But
Right.
I don't know that. But so yeah, I think he benefits certainly in the Palestine question that he's not, Christopher Freeland, he's not like committed to the whole thing, and I think he understands that the Liberal Party voters are actually this is the genocide doesn't play well, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's not. There's obviously, we know the media frames it like everyone supports the genocide, but that's actually not reality. And so the leadership race offers an opportunity for the grassroots movements, and they of course very successfully did that with Chrystia Freeland's launch, where a dozen plus people interrupted her one after another.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, just completely took the spotlight. And they did, it's the double thing. They get the genocide into the discussion, which obviously would have been no discussion, but some of the reporters mentioned, some of the stories mentioned criticism of her supporting genocide, some about the lack of a two-way arms embargo, her lack of refusing to meet with constituents on the matter, so that message gets out there. But it just damages her, right? So that's also
it doesn't make her look popular. Right?
Yeah, it does make her look popular, and it just takes her off of the message that she wanted to put out there, which was, I'm the best person to stand up to Trump, which we can get into why that's ridiculous. But so this was a very effective. Now, broadening it out, I think that the Palestine anti-genocide forces and internationalist forces, if they can contribute and be perceived to have contributed to undermining Freeland's bid to become prime minister, that matters. That's something that's actually, that matters, because it's an assertion of power that almost never happens from an internationalist, let's call it anti-imperialist kind of direction. And I think we actually have the forces to do that. Like, they showed very clearly on Sunday that very well organized action. They had the press release in advance. They did all this kind of stuff, and they got so much media attention. But also, I think we have the forces across the country to show up at all of Chrystia Freeland's events, to have one or two people there to ask a tough question, or
right.
hold.
That's
a
if
sign.
she has events, though. Right?
But
she's not scared off by that one.
But we win that way either way, because politicians, when they're seeking out votes, it's almost essential to go around and have quite open events. That's why she did it at the Boys and Girls Club in Toronto. She wanted to frame it as, I'm at this sort of like community thing. I'm a person of the people, and she got. It didn't work out well. It didn't work out for her.
Well, she opened it to the public because she wanted a crowd.
Yeah, she wanted a crowd, exactly. Yeah, people just showed up and whatever. But the politicians, I've been through that with Trudeau, on the plateau where he does during the election 2019 at the, the cafe, well-known, it's called Olympico Cafe? Olympia, what is it called? The well-known cafe, they got one in the Old Port as well, a few of them across the city. He wants to do his thing outside with all these liberals. I think it was the final, or one of the final things just before the election. It's just they want the shot of him with the people. That's right. That's the shot. That's why every day after every election he's won, he shows up at the metro at the what's the metro station in his riding to shake hands. And anyways, this is the stuff that Freeland's been trying that. Trudeau obviously trying that. Poilievre has his slightly different version of that too. He's trying it. So that offers opportunity for grassroots organizers to do it. And we have, clearly over the past 16 months, we have the people to do this now. We have enough people in Canada who are appalled, who have taken all kinds of different actions over the past 16 months. And to channel some of that towards defeating Freeland, I think is a smart political strategy and a doable political strategy. So it's I think you can, some people, there's a purity politics world where it's like we don't want to intervene in this this liberal leadership race because it's they're the baddies, and it's completely true that they are the baddies, but if you want to change the world, you do have to operate where the world is, right. and there's forms of inserting into these races if I join the Liberal Party to vote against Chrystia Freeland, it doesn't mean that I endorse Mark Carney's him and his billionaire
But I mean,
friend.
if one wants to maximize their political influence, then signing up for free for the Liberal Party to vote for one candidate or the other, I mean, if you can get past, the ideological block of being a Liberal member for a few days, then it is a way to exert a certain amount of influence.
Yeah, and I think it's a smart way to exert that influence. So I think people should do that. And and like I said, I've been involved in internationalist, let's call it anti-imperialist Canadian stuff for 20 plus years, and there's almost never is the movement able to assert electoral power. We're able to assert some degrees of power around the edges and generate conversation or this and that, but it's very rare with some form of electoral power. And I have been involved in one campaign where we did assert some electoral power, which was a campaign on Haiti against Pierre Pettigrew in the 2006 election. He was the former foreign affairs minister and had a riding, which actually Trudeau's riding, Papineau, and we put up 1,500 posters in his riding, wanted for crimes against humanity in Haiti. We handed out 15,000 leaflets, and both Le Devoir and La Presse said that we contributed to his defeat. He lost to someone, but it was a totally negative campaign. We weren't in any way endorsed. It was Bloc Québécois, a woman of Haitian descent, who ends up winning, defeating him, and it's usual Liberal riding. But it was a form of asserting that here we have this really marginalized movement, marginalized issue, and we were asserting some negative electoral power. And again, this would be a much higher scale if you were perceived to have contributed to Chrystia Freeland not being the prime minister, that a lot of people thought she would become because of her being aggressive anti-Palestinian. That would be historic.
Right. And we know that Freeland is worse than Carney based on what we've seen so far, right? In the sense that Carney is an unknown, somewhat of a blank slate, but a banker. And Chrystia Freeland, we already know who she is. We've already seen what she's done in government, and she needs to be stopped.
Yeah, and again, I think it's not Canada's support for the genocide in Gaza is not up to individuals. It's not up to political parties even. This is much more structural than that. There are individuals who are particularly bad. Chrystia Freeland is clearly within the box of the Liberal Party. She is particularly bad, not just on Palestine, on foreign policy. Right. In her case, it's pretty clear cut. Stéphane Dion, who was the first foreign affairs minister of Trudeau, he was better. I mean, I didn't like Stéphane Dion, but he represented the better part of the Liberal Party on foreign policy. Chrystia Freeland, she takes it to a much more aggressively imperialist kind of direction, and
kind of like a bloodthirsty kind of
she's a neocon. I mean, she's a neocon. She obviously it's well known, as you mentioned, her historic stuff with Russia and that whole Ukraine question.
She's been ready to start World War III with Russia for years now, right?
Yes, she's been 30 some odd years, since the late 80s when she went there as a student to try to break up the Soviet Union. I mean, that was her, right? That's the politics she grew up on that issue. But she's been viewed. The foreign affairs minister of Venezuela stated that Harper's Venezuela policy was better, right? It's when Freeland and Dion's policy was better, and when Freeland gets in and she pushes, really goes hard and brings in the Lima Group and that. So it was the Freeland as a character, as an individual. Any Liberal Party policy towards Venezuela was going to be bad, but Freeland was on the more hawkish end of that and willing to do U.S. bidding, and that's across the borders. She made a speech in 2018 with Netanyahu when she goes to Israel, and she says in the speech, there's a number of things it's worth reading the whole speech, but one of the things she says is the world needs more Israel.
Wow.
I mean, she's why? She says in the context of some people say the world needs more Canada, and then she goes on a bit and she says, but the world also needs more Israel. Why would a Canadian politician say the world needs more of any other country. I mean, I don't even like someone saying the world.
Well, it's
needs
like she's
Canada.
saying that they should expand Israel further into Palestinian land, right?
I think that in reality that is actually what she is saying, but I don't think that would be how she would exactly it. But on top of that, in the speech, she says that if Canada wins its bid for a seat on the Security Council, the UN Security Council, it will act as a quote asset for Israel. Why would a Canadian politician, foreign minister, say we would act as an asset for any country? She also says our support for Israel is ironclad and irreversible. Ironclad is there another word as well. So it's so over the top, deferential to Israel.
Actually, this reminds me of a previous episode in which you and I talked about for an hour about the Canadian Zionism and how it comes about through many different institutional levers in Canada. So I'd encourage people to take a look at that as well. Yeah. And we're coming up just to the 1 hour point. So I just want to conclude on what is the mobilizing potential within the Canadian left, given the arrival of Trump, given the situation with the United States, and the end of the Trudeau government in the coming months. Do you think that in the next few years that we'll really be able to get back to some strong left-wing activism in Canada?
Well, I think there's been some strong activism, remarkable activism on the Palestine question over the past 16 months. I think there's in terms of foreign policy, there's never been, this is the biggest popular uprising in the history of Canada on internationalist uprising. The Vietnam War, there was some stuff, but this is unique. I mean, two demonstrations every weekend in Montreal for
Right, it's been the biggest cause in Canada since it started, right?
So that's there. Now, I think Trump, more broadly, Trump is going to, Canadian politics are going to be seriously rattled by, and it's playing. The process is starting out, and I think that you will see sort of a counter. I think that Pierre Poilievre is the one who's desperate for the election to happen as soon as possible, because the longer this goes, longer the election doesn't happen, Poilievre's chance of winning, I think, is going to go down and down and down, because all the craziness coming from Trump, and it's very obvious that Poilievre is not the right person to respond to Trump, and then he's just wants to be a kind of mini type Trump. Where that goes with sort of grassroots kind of left mobilization, I think it's always hard to tell. I'm guessing it will. My guess is that it is going to be an upsurge. I think that you're going to see the NDP and whatever start taking a kind of left nationalist. So we don't just have the three richest people in the world show up at our inauguration like Trump did. That's what Nikki Ashton was positioning yesterday in her criticism of Canada supporting the U.S. So I think that's kind of Trump is just such a he says a lot of the bad stuff out loud. Like he articulates this the most egregious pro-capitalist, pro-rich, pro-U.S. empire kind of that rubs most people the wrong way, and the more sophisticated people like a Biden or Blinken, you don't say, there's certain things you don't say. You pursue those policies, but you don't say it. Right. And Trump saying it makes it that much easier to respond for sort of progressive forces. So my guess is there will be a resurgence of left activism. We've seen that on the Palestine question, and I think that likely that will be coming together. Now, Trump's going to do a lot of damage. He's already done a lot of damage in the first 24 hours. From an environmental standpoint, he's done some wild damage. But whether that resistance, I think the resistance in Canada very clearly will grow. I'm not sure about the U.S., but I would assume there will be some after a few months of Trump, that the sort of resistance will grow in the U.S. as well.
Well, I sure hope so. Anyway, thank you very much for coming on the podcast again, and look forward to following up with you soon.
Thanks for having me.